one of the women working there who's specifically been liaising with me for the trip. Her name is Nina Kingsford-Smith, and she's actually a relative of Sir Charles Kingsford-Smith. As soon as she found out about what I was doing, she shared, probably on like a family group chat or something, my story with the rest of the Kingsford-Smith family.
Welcome aboard the HiflyMedia podcast, dedicated to sharing the stories and experiences of the amazing people who make aviation happen. From pilots like me to engineers, air traffic controllers and others. I'll explore their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced and the triumphs they've achieved. My name is Damien and I'll be your host. Whether you're a seasoned aviation enthusiast or new to the field, I invite you to join me as we take off on this journey of discovery. Welcome to our next aviation adventure on the HiflyMedia podcast. Today we're honoured to soar with an exceptional young aviator, Chloe Familton. At just 17 years old, Chloe embarked on a groundbreaking solo flight, circumnavigating Australia in a light aeroplane. On the day that this episode is released, Chloe will have just turned 18, so go wish her a happy birthday on the socials. Her journey, which began at Cessnock Airport in New South Wales, is not just about breaking records, but also about raising awareness and funds for the charity A Start in Life, supporting students facing financial barriers to education. Join us as we navigate the skies with Chloe, exploring her passion for aviation and commitment to making a difference. Welcome, Chloe, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No, pleasure's all ours. So tell us, I actually only came across Chloe in the last few days because of a post that was made on one of the social platforms by the Sunshine Coast Aero Club. It captivated me. What you're doing captivated me. I wished I'd had the courage and the gumption and the drive to learn to fly at your age, but I didn't. I was 20 years older. So tell us, what shaped this interest in aviation? What inspired your passion in aviation? Where's this come from?
I think I've always had a bit of an interest in aviation. So my grandfather was a navigator in the Royal New Zealand Air Force during the Vietnam War, and then also worked in air traffic control for a very long time. So when I was younger, I would actually go visit him when he worked in the tower, and I got to see planes take off and land. So for me, that was very much a formative experience, and having that at such a young age really inspired me to the idea of potentially one day learning to fly. But that opportunity I got when I was 15. So I'm in Girl Guides. I've been a guide for almost a decade now. I think as an organisation, it's incredible in guiding and scouting for helping young people really to push themselves and achieve some really interesting things. So when I was 15 in April of 2021, I attended a Girls in Aviation Day hosted by the guides at Bankstown Airport. And I had the chance to do a 30-minute trial flight. And from that moment on, I was completely hooked and knew that definitely learning to fly was something I really wanted to do.
That's so cool. I'm a Ventura Scout leader, so I'm in a scouting organisation, and I absolutely love the scouting organisation and the guides organisation and what they're facilitating for youth, not only in our country but around the world. So it's super exciting to hear that you got obviously inspired and impressed by your grandfather's history, but also that it was an organisation such as Guides that led you to actually sitting in an aeroplane, and no doubt a small aeroplane, something like a Cessna 172 would be my guess, and going on that trial introductory flight. That's so cool.
And I think also as well, I did a lot of my initial training through the Scouts Air Activity Centre in Camden, where the Scouts own 3 Cessnas, and they offer much cheaper hire to adult leaders or youth members as well, which really also facilitated me learning how to fly, because I actually learnt with my dad. He also has a PPL, is currently working on a CPL, who's also an adult leader in Scouts. So that was really good. I actually, another commonality we have is I used a lot of flying for some activities for my Queen's Guide too. So.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And so that's basically, I guess, your start in aviation. Do you currently have your private pilot's license, or are you working towards that? Have you got like an RPL with navigation? What qualifications do you currently have?
Yep. So I have my PPL. I got that in February of this year. And last year in May is when I got my RPL.
Rightio. So Feb this year, your private pilot's license, and obviously that's what you're trekking around Australia under that license, which is awesome.
Yep.
And whether or not the weather's pretty ordinary on the Sunshine Coast at the moment, so I don't know if your stay is being extended at all here because of that, but that's one of the joys of flying VFR, isn't it?
Yeah, I think even though sometimes it definitely can be very frustrating, it's fun to look at the challenge of working out, can you fly, and if you can, how to do it safely, legally, working through all of the issues.
Yeah. And that's such an awesome perspective and attitude to have. Very cool. So you're young, either you're at the tail end of schooling or you've just finished schooling, one of the two. I'm not entirely sure. You might share that with us. What challenges did you face as a young person, getting in a cockpit, studying the theory that goes along with your private pilot's license and juggling school?
I think it was very much a very poorly sometimes balanced exercise in time management, where, of course, learning to fly takes a lot of commitment on the ground and also the time that you spend in the air. And on top of that, especially planning for this flight, the logistics required to fly a plane around Australia is incredible, actually. And doing that alongside finishing year 12, which for me happened about 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. But it was definitely a very interesting balance. So for much of my senior schooling years, I've been flying alongside it. So it's very much required me to be quite smart about the time I allocate to first studying for schoolwork and, of course, all of my aviation study as well. I think I very much benefited from having my dad also learning how to fly as something or someone really to motivate me to keep going with a lot of the training for that.
Yeah, that'd be invaluable, no doubt. And I hadn't even considered the whole logistics side of, planning that circumnavigation. And would I be right in assuming that, your dad and others, maybe some instructors you've got have been fairly heavily involved in that, or have you kind of done that off your own bat mostly with a bit of guidance?
I think a lot of the planning and stuff on the ground has very much been work in collaboration with my parents and my instructors and other people mentoring me. So I'm very lucky that I've had, I put out a call to a bunch of people who were in some of these more remote areas and had local knowledge about, you can call this person if you need something, or this is where you can go where there's definitely fuel, and things that you just wouldn't be aware of unless you really lived there or flying there often. So I think, I'm very grateful that I've been able to rely on other people to help me get some of those parts of the planning done.
And you know what? When I started out in flying, I had a big issue with imposter syndrome. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't even know that was a thing, and it's probably not something that's been, a term that's been coined until more recently. But the thing that I've learned about aviation is, for the most part, and I mean like 99.9% of people involved in aviation are just more than happy to help and more than happy to be that guiding light as needed, because they just want to see other people succeed in aviation. Have you found that in these engagements where people are just bending over backwards just to help out?
Yeah, I think it's almost been overwhelming, the amount of support I've received. It definitely wasn't what I expected. It's something I'm very grateful for. Of course, you're talking about, that 99%, and I will confess that there definitely have been some people who haven't been as helpful or as kind about the whole idea, but very much for the most part, I'm incredibly grateful for the welcoming support of Australian aviation, the community as a whole. That's
so cool. What are some of the other challenges that you've faced, whether it be with the planning or whether it be with even just your PPL experience, getting to that stage where you were qualified? What are some challenges that you had along the way?
I think you mentioned before the idea of imposter syndrome and perhaps even doubting yourself a little bit. I'm sure that definitely that's something that you might experience as a student pilot. I'm sure, that's something you talked about. It's something that I personally experienced is very much, I remember for my first solo is going up and being mid-downwind for the first circuit and then realizing that I was on my own and then had to land the plane on my and wait, you do this again. How does this all work? Yeah, I think especially being younger and maybe not as confident in myself, it was a bit of an interesting challenge to realize that, I have this license for a reason. I've demonstrated I have particular skills, and you can be confident without being completely cocky, I guess, when you're flying.
Yes, 100%. And the reality is you have been deemed safe by someone who's deemed a lot of people safe. You know, they've done a lot of flying, they've seen a lot of people fly. And so that took me a lot to be comfortable with. I think when I got my private pilot's license, I had exactly the same experiences as you when I did my first solo, and it didn't really hit me just like you until I was on downwind. And I think that's because you got so much to think about, you know, when you're rolling down the runway, you've taken off, you've turned onto crosswind, you've turned onto down. So by the time you turn onto downwind, you've had a lot to think about, and then you finally got time to stop and breathe because you've leveled out, you know. And I had the same thing, which was like, what the heck? I'm in a plane on my own. Yeah, good to know I'm not alone. Where do you want to go? Like, where do you want to go long term when it comes to aviation?
Long term, I'm interested in flying in the Air Force.
Okay.
I started the application process for that. It's very much involved, competitive. It's something I have a lot of respect for, but definitely that's where I'd love to end up eventually in the future.
And what kind of tin would you like to fly in the Air Force?
I'm not entirely sure just yet. For me, I think I'm quite an altruistic person, and I also love the idea of aviation as a career, not just as a hobby. And that's where I think I could combine those two things, I think.
Well, all the best with that. I know that recruitment process is very grueling and very, very competitive, but you certainly at your age are showing the gumption to kick those goals.
Thank you.
Can I ask, have you considered, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, can I ask, have you considered what happens if the Air Force doesn't work out?
Yeah, so I'm planning still to go to university at a university in Sydney and then work on my CPL. So I mentioned before my dad is currently working on his, so we've already got all of the Bob Tate books lined up at home.
Yep.
And then find another career where I'm working in aviation. I'd love to go into the aeromed world. Because it's still being able to help people and do something good while exploring my passion for flying.
Well, certainly don't give up on that dream, Chloe. If you know your eyes are set on the Air Force and flying for the Air Force, then that's the goal, you know, that's the challenge. And if for whatever reason it doesn't happen, at least you've got a backup plan, which is not surprising, to be honest. Tell us a bit about the trip. So you've started out in Cessnock and you've come north here. So you're in southeast Queensland at the moment. What's the rough flight plan look like with where you're going?
Yep. So pretty much as the circumnavigation, it's tracking in vaguely coastal. So my next leg will be up to Mackay, and then onwards all the way up through Cairns to Horn Island, around the Gulf, and then stopping in Darwin for a few days to celebrate my birthday.
Nice.
Then track along into WA along the coast. I'm planning on having the 50-hour oil done for my plane in Perth. We'll land at Jandakot and then spend a few days in Perth while that's getting sorted out. Then tracking along the southern part of the country, I'm going to meet up with my instructor one more time because I'll be flying over to Tasmania, and we have a plan that will involve me doing a dual flight of the Bass Strait before I do it solo, just because that's probably one of the more unforgiving parts of the trip. Yeah. And I just think the chance to get to practice that with an instructor before I actually go out and do it for reals is definitely quite valuable.
Oh, 100%.
And then heading north back to Cessnock and then home.
What challenges or concerns do you foresee on this journey? So whether that be, and you break this down however you want to. So I'd love to talk about challenges or concerns you're going to foresee on your circumnavigation of this awesome land we live in, but also with your, upcoming, now that you've finished your formal schooling, whether, the challenges you foresee, whether that be going into the Air Force or whether that be pursuing a full-time career in aviation, and going to university. What challenges or concerns do you have?
I don't know where to start with this, but definitely there has been a lot of talk on the planning end about specifically challenges with the flight as a flight. So I'm conscious that obviously I will be in the north during the wet season, which presents very unique challenges. So as a part of that, we've come up with a backup plan, which will take me more through the Red Centre. So I do have contacts there and trying just to avoid the worst of the weather. I think I'm also because I've just finished schooling and university, and whatever happens next year is a concern for next year, I do have a lot of time, which is something I'm quite grateful for. So it's the idea with now I've been holding in the Queensland for a little while just because the weather isn't fabulous, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's also about, I guess, managing fatigue on the trip, is the idea that what you mentioned is, even though I certainly won't be driving, every flight is optional, and it's okay if I stay in a spot for a few days.
Yeah.
I think as well, we've already talked about flying over to Tasmania is very much, it's over water in a plane with one engine. Just as a standalone, there is some risk involved in that. But I've obviously been doing a lot of research into it. I'll be practicing it dual before I set off on my own. So it's very much, well, that's about aviation, is very much about risk awareness, management.
And risk mitigation. Yeah, 100%. I think it's incredibly wise that you're doing the crossing initially with an instructor. That makes a lot of sense. And for a number of different reasons that any aviator would understand. I didn't think about fatigue. That's a good point. Flying solo for all those days. But like you said, at this point in time, you know, whilst most school leavers would be off, you know, going to schoolies week, you're flying a plane around the country. But then there is that level of fatigue management.
Yeah.
And of course weather, but you can't do anything about weather. But because you're not on a tight timeline, then if you have to park up for a day or two, you can park up. And if it's one thing I've learned in my many years of being on this planet, it's just to enjoy the journey. So if you have to park up, well, get to know the place. You know, what a cool opportunity.
Yeah. I think it's very easy as an aviator to get a bit of a case of get there itis, which is dangerous, and also, I guess, takes away from the fun of the flight. So for me, I think especially with the scale of the trip can be a little bit overwhelming at times. I'm breaking it down into each leg, each flight. I'm going to go here and I'm going to get to see all of this stuff along the way. And up in this place, I'll be able to meet up with this person and do this and this. And I think by breaking it down into those smaller steps, and I think really appreciating, firstly, every moment and how lucky I am to enjoy all of these, is the way I'll be approaching the flight as a whole.
I love it. I love that attitude. Very cool. Tell us about A Start in Life. So pretend I know nothing. What is this charity and what do they do and how can people help?
Yeah. So they're a charity helping young Australians overcome barriers to have access to education. So firstly,
can you unpack what that means?
Yeah. So they'll work with specific students who are struggling financially by firstly providing support for things like school equipment, uniforms, laptops, school camps.
Yeah.
They also have career mentoring programs. And they're actually just developing, this lines up really, really nicely with my flight, and I didn't realize this until I got in contact with the charity, but they're developing a program which is specifically about building skills related to technology in a modern developing world, which lines up really, really nicely with the idea of encouraging people in aviation as a career and as developing technology. So the charity sponsors students from primary school all the way up to tertiary education as well. And as a part of this flight, I'm specifically trying to raise money through the donations you can make to A Start in Life on their website. There's a link also on my website, which is just chloefamilton.au, which will take you directly there. Also, you can read more about it on that too.
Cool. So just to restate, if listeners wanted to donate to A Start in Life, you can go to chloefamilton.au or you can go to astartinlife.org.au. And I've just learned from perusing their site that they're 100 years old this year. Like, this isn't a new charity. This is a well-established charity in our country. Yeah, okay. So your goal was $20,000. Is that what you're aiming to raise?
Yes.
Do you mind telling us how far along that path you are?
At the moment, we're over 3,000, so I'm getting weekly updates with how much has come in, but that's where we're at so far.
And if people want to donate, I see the bright yellow donate button up on the top right-hand side. Is there a way that they can link that to you when they donate?
Yep. So when you donate, there'll be an option to add a message. And if you'll put like for Chloe's flight or something like that, the charity will know specifically that it's coming from this flight. So we'll be able to easily add it to the total.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So get out there. For those listeners that want to make that donation, please go ahead and do that and tag Chloe when you do make that donation. That'll be a great help. And it's a wonderful thing that you're doing as far as raising money for a worthwhile organisation.
I think as well, I think that very much comes from my family. So we've been in support of A Start in Life for pretty much since I started primary school. So it was the idea that every Christmas as well, instead of just buying a heap of presents to myself and my brother, part of the Christmas gifts would be the donation instead. So that's very much, we've been working with the charity sponsoring them for quite a long time as a family. So for me, I'm very, very happy to continue it through the flight.
That's really commendable. Well done, Chloe. Well done. Before we roll into the final set of questions, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with the listeners as far as your experience, as far as where you want to go, or as far as this flight in particular?
I think I will share a very interesting anecdote, which came out of working with A Start in Life, but has turned into so much more than that. So one of the women working there who's specifically been liaising with me for the trip, her name is Nina Kingsford Smith. And she's actually a relative of Sir Charles Kingsford Smith.
It's a very distinct surname.
As soon as she found out about what I was doing, she shared, probably on like a family group chat or something, my story with the rest of the Kingsford Smith family. And just before I was set to depart, I received in the mail a gift from Grace Kingsford Smith, who was married to his nephew. And it's actually a handkerchief that is signed by Sir Charles himself.
Wow.
And it's been gifted to me. I'm a bit superstitious as a person, even though, aviation is all about the science of it and following all of the processes. I'm still a little superstitious. So for me, as a little good luck token to take around the country, I have in my flight bag a handkerchief that belonged to Sir Charles Kingsford Smith.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And, yeah, I'm very passionate about history, so that meant an awful lot to me, and the support specifically from the Kingsford Smith family is something I'm very honoured to have, something very interesting as well. So
you couldn't have a more qualified spirit to be guiding you along the way.
Yeah.
So you've got your private pilot's licence. You've done flying through the Air Activity Centre with scouts and guides, which is fantastic, and no doubt you've got some experiences there. And I'd put $100 down that you're going to create some pretty memorable experiences between leaving the Sunshine Coast and returning home to Cessnock. What can you tell us about a memorable experience that you've had flying a particular aircraft to date that made it special to you? You have already talked about your solo, so I'm actually going to ask you to talk about something else. What's something, a flying experience that you want to share with us?
I think, while I no longer fly out of the Scouts Air Activity Centre, this is an experience from when I did. So they have an aircraft which has the call sign Juliet Bravo Charlie and JBC. Mm-hmm. So it happened that at my flight school, there aren't many women in aviation. So at the school at the time, there was one female instructor and one other female student. My instructor, she's still my instructor to date. Her name is Janaea, and the other student was Beck. And it just happened that when we were on a flyaway as a group, we realized that one of the aircraft was called JBC, and our names start with JB.
Ah, right. Yeah, so,
that's cool. We're very, very close, the three of us, because obviously we were, for pretty much the entire time I was flying there, the only women. So we'd often go on flights together, and always when we went out to go fly somewhere, we would take JBC.
That's so cool. Love it. What's one of your most fear-filled flight experiences?
Ooh, I think it's a very good question. I'll say some of the flying so far is when I was very early on in my flying training. Some of the solos I was sent on, I guess it's I'd say I'll probably go back to my first solo and maybe some of my first aerial or nav solos, because my nav solo was up to Cessnock, and I think maybe it's just how I remember it, but the CTAF was incredibly busy, especially for a young student pilot. So I remember doing about 3 or 4 orbits on the dead side before I could do my midfield crosswind join. So even though I think now circuit joins are something obviously I'm a lot more comfortable with, because that was over a year ago I did that. But I think some of my more earlier experiences were the ones that taught me the most, I think.
Yep. I can definitely relate to that. And it's almost like, whether it's fear or whether it's just like a high workload, when you're in those, especially when they're new experiences. But, no doubt, in that much flying, in that much territory where you've never flown before, you're going to have some of those experiences where I don't know that they'll be fear-filled, but I would dare say they would be. You're going to have a high workload. It's like even flying into Darwin. If you're flying into Townsville, you're talking about RAF bases. But then from where you're from, you've probably flown around Williamtown, I'd imagine.
Yes, so I have transited Williamtown a few times, which definitely the first time is quite stressful. And what doesn't help is if you're coming southbound, the area where you're meant to make your kind of inbound or request call is really, really patchy in terms of radio. So
right.
First time I did that, I had to call them about 3 or 4 times and then say again about 3 or 4 times before I actually got my transponder code.
Yeah.
Which, for someone who was quite new and not as familiar with radios and talking to the strangers, especially if the strangers are military strangers, that can be quite stressful. But I think now, every single controller I've talked to has been absolutely lovely. So, I love having a bit of a chat, right?
Yes, that's true. They're there to help, if they're there to serve you, they're there to make you safe. You've talked about Mackay, you've talked about Cairns, Townsville's in the middle, you're going to Darwin, you're going to Jandakot. These are all towered aerodromes, some of which have a military presence at them. So just remember that, and I'm sure you will. But even if you're under the pump, just remember that they're there to help.
I think it's something my instructor told me that I still remember is it's Air Services Australia, not Air Overlords Australia.
Correct.
So they're there to help you. That's their job. And I think especially as a student, you can fall into the trap of, I don't really know what to say or do, so I'll be quiet on the radios. And especially if you're in a CTAF, that's probably one of the worst things if you're not making reports and you can see a situation and you're not doing anything about it. It's, very important to, I guess, communicate something if you feel there's a genuine need to, I guess.
Yeah, that's right, 100%. If you were given an expense-free opportunity to be endorsed on any airframe without limitation, what would it be and why?
I'd say I personally am an absolute history nerd. I love history, specifically aviation history. So for that reason, I would select the Yak 3.
Oh, it's very Mustang-esque, isn't it?
Yeah. It's actually based on, I took extension history in school this year, and part of that is for 70% of the final grade for the course, you'd get to do a research project on anything. And funnily enough, I picked female pilots during World War II. Don't know where that came from, but so a lot of my work was focused on researching Soviet women because unlike all of the other Allied nations during the war, they had females operating in combat roles.
Yep.
So the world's only female air aces were produced in Soviet fighter regiments during the Second World War. And you had women flying over 1,000 bomber combat sorties on various different types. So I think because of perhaps my passion for history and maybe connection to female aviators of the past, it would be the Yak 3.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yak 3. No one said a Russian plane yet. So there you go. You are the first. What advice would you give someone just starting out in aviation? What resources or support systems would you recommend they seek out?
I think often when I hear questions of this, I try to think back to year 10, 15-year-old Chloe. So I think in terms of resources, I think it's definitely important to find your niche and find your community where you feel accepted, supported, and comfortable. So whether that be in scouting and guiding, for myself specifically, I'm part of the Australian Women Pilots Association, and I found just the social aspect of that to be really, really wonderful. I think in terms of resources, it's important to remember that while yes, there will be the odd people, specifically if you're someone like me who's younger and female, there will be people who will doubt you and will not have the best opinion of you. But for the most part, the community is incredibly welcoming, incredibly supportive. So it's okay to go on to perhaps like forums or Facebook groups, reach out and ask for help, because most people will be completely bending over backwards to see you succeed as well.
Yeah.
I think that's really the beautiful thing about aviation, is that we're all very closely connected and we're all very supportive of one another. So I think in terms of starting out, let go of any fears you have of not being good enough or people not taking you seriously. Reach out and make contact and follow up with resources that people send you. So a lot of YouTube channels or people online who post about their experiences where you can learn from those as well, I found really beneficial. So yeah, that's pretty much what I would recommend to anyone listening or wanting to start out in aviation. That's my advice.
And that's some really, really sound advice. And you're not the first person to say that. I'm pretty sure it was Aaron Douglas who also talked about finding your niche, finding out, being with those people that are going to make you feel comfortable, because that is half the battle, I think. And especially coming into, unless you're an alpha type personality, coming into a world that seems elitist, like aviation. And I say seems because most of it is in people's head that it is, when really they're just normal people who love to fly. But if you can find those people that you gel with and you can connect with, then you're just enjoying the experience together, and what else could be grander, As our aviation journey with Chloe Familton concludes, we extend our gratitude for joining us on this remarkable adventure. Chloe's determination not only to break records, but also to support fellow young Australians through the charity A Start in Life is truly inspiring. Follow Chloe's continued journey at chloefamilton.au. And until next time, may your skies be clear and your dreams take flight. And Chloe, all the best for your upcoming adventure, and may you have blue skies.
Awesome.
Join us next time for more fascinating discussions. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform, and if you'd like to help out, feel free to leave a review. That'll help spread the word. Alternatively, you can listen to the podcast on the HiflyMedia YouTube channel. Music for the podcast is titled Dance With Me by Asher Lee, available at upbeat.io. The HiflyMedia podcast, uncovering the people and passion behind aviation, one story at a time.